Hi everyone, thanks for joining. My name is Chris Betcher and I'm just going to take you through part 2 of our spreadsheet course for school support staff. And if you want to go back and watch anything from our previous session just to catch up, I'll be picking up where we left off from there. So you might recall that we had this spreadsheet where we looked at some really basic things like being able to fill down a row. We talked about using the control key to flip or reverse the way that behaves. So for example, whether you want to count some numbers going 1, 1, 1, 1, 1 or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you can reverse that behavior with the control key or the option key on a Mac. We talked about how you can add numbers up using the plus formula or the sum formula, and you've also got things like the average, and we talked about the big 5 formulas: sum, average, max, bin, count, and those are the formulas you really should know how to use. They are kind of the essentials. And finally, we talked about the way you can take words and you can join words together using a technique called concatenation. And just to refresh you on that, that's where you use, instead of a plus sign to add things together, you use the ampersand or the and symbol to join words together. So that was some of the things we talked about. Then we looked at this grade book over here, where we took that and looked at some of the ways you can, like for example here, we added up all the numbers in these cells across the side here, and we worked out the average as well. We also talked about using these grey lines here to lock off or to freeze the top row or top rows or side column rows if you need to, and how that works. And then finally we got to this sheet here where we talked about pardon me, some of the things you can do in terms of managing data. We looked at splitting names using the split command up here in the data menu. There's the option to split text to columns. We looked at a formula where you can calculate the age using a formula called date diff or date difference. And essentially we just investigated some of the formulas that you can use. So that's kind of where we got up to. I want to pick up from here by talking about primarily filtering and sorting, and introduce you to a thing called a pivot table. Don't freak out about the pivot tables. Every time you hear the word pivot table, people go, oh, that's a hard thing. I'm not sure how that works. I want to show you how it can be a really easy but very useful thing to use. So just sticking with this sheet of data we've been using, you might notice that, let me just turn this off for a moment because I was playing with that before. So you might notice, for example, every time I put my mouse over the column headings here, so if I click on F, you'll see that I get a little drop down arrow next to F. And one of the things that it can do, it can control all the sorts of things that happen in that column. But the one I want to draw your attention to is this sorting. So I can sort the whole sheet. Now A to Z means beginning to end, so that might be A to Z if it's words, might be 1 to 10 if it's numbers, and of course Z to A is the reverse of that. So that's a way you can create sorts on a column just by using that top. So for example, if I sort column E by going A to Z, you'll see I get the ages going from youngest to oldest. If I was to do the same thing on date of birth and I was to sort that sheet A to Z there from date of birth, it's going to go from the earliest to the latest, which in fact makes the age go from the oldest to the youngest, of course. And so I can sort in all sorts of different ways. I can sort by sort of last name. I could come up here and sort that sheet by the last name. And you'll notice when I do that, it sorts the entire sheet. So if you sort one column, it does sort everything across the sheet. So it brings everything with it. You don't have to worry about one column getting out of sync. So that's basic sorting. Now, sometimes though, you want to do sorting that's a little bit not just basic sorting. You want to sort in other ways. And so the easiest way to do that is to use this little button up here called a filter. It looks like a little funnel, okay? So I want to talk about the filter, and in a moment we'll talk about the button next to that, which is called filter views, and we'll talk about what the difference is. So a filter essentially works like this. The usual way for a filter is you would select the top row. That's generally where you'd apply a filter because that's where your headings are for the columns. So general best practice here is you'd select the top row and then turn the filter on by clicking on the little funnel icon. And you'll notice that it gets a green outline around it. That green outline is telling you that this is the area that will be subject to the filter we're about to apply. And the reason that's important is because sometimes your sheets can be fed by a form. In other words, people are filling in the form, and as the form results come in, they populate the sheet. Just be aware that if you were in the middle of filtering and someone filled in a form and added new rows, then those new rows would not be part of that green highlighted area, so they wouldn't be subject to the filter. They'd be outside the filtered area. And if you wanted to include them, you'd have to turn the filter off, turn it on again, and then it would include the new data. Just be aware of that one because it is a little bit of a trap sometimes. So I've highlighted that. You can see it's got the green area around it. That's what I'll be filtering. So when you turn that filter on, you'll notice all of the columns here, all the column headers, get this little like a upside down triangle icon next to it right there. And when you click on it, you can do things to that column. So we've got our sort, which we saw before. We could also sort by color if we had color in a cell. So we don't in this case, but if we had things identified in different colors, we could actually sort by color. We could filter by color, so we could show only certain colors if we wanted to. So there's sorting, which is putting things in order, and there's filtering, which is including or excluding things depending on whether they match. So I'll give you a simple example about this. So let's just go to the age column, for example. So I'll click on the little drop down next to the age column. And you can see down here it says 15, 16, 17, 18, because if you look carefully, those are the options in this column, right? So when I go there and choose and look at that, they're all ticked. But if I wanted to say only see the 15 and 16-year-olds, I could clear all that out and then only tick 15 and 16. And when I say OK, it will filter that sheet down and only show me things where the age matches 15 and 16. And you can tell this is being filtered because it's actually got a little green symbol there in the shape of a funnel to tell me that this column is acting as a filter at the moment. Now, let me just go back in there and let's select all again and turn everything back on, and you can see it all comes back again. Now, so you can filter in all sorts of different ways. Now, it gets a little bit more useful when you come in here and not just filter whether things are turned on or off, but you can filter by specific conditions. So for example, I might come in here and say, I want to filter this where the date is before, before, I don't know, in the past year, right? I can say, well, actually they're all before the past year. Sorry, that's probably not a good example. Let me not do that. But you get the idea there. So you can filter by a condition, in this case saying the date is, and I could put a specific date in there if I wanted to. So let's just not do that. That's probably a bad example. Let's try a different one here. We've got this zodiac one here. Let's find all of the Libras. All right. So I go in there and I clear all that out and I say only show me Libras and I say OK, and you can see it filters down to just that. So that's the way filters work. You can tell the filter's still enabled because I've got this green border around things. If I turn filters off, the green goes away and everything that was filtered becomes unfiltered and I get my entire list back. Okay. Now this makes more sense when you have a larger amount of data. So let me just turn on filter views here for a moment. This is quite a big sheet here. You can see it starts at row 1 and goes all the way down. If I scroll, I've probably got just over 1,000. There's 1,100 rows in this spreadsheet. So it's quite a bit of data. And you can see, by the way, this is a list of all the schools in Western Australia. I don't know why I've got this, I just do. First thing I would do when I see a sheet like this, I would lock off this top row. I would drag that little grey line down to lock off the top row, so I freeze that top row. The reason you need to freeze the top row is if you don't, your top row will get caught up in any filtering that you do, and it will treat it as just another row. So for example, if I don't filter that and if I don't lock that top row off and I try and filter by column A, then this word area gets treated like just one of the words in this list. Okay, and I don't want that. I want it to remain a heading. So let's just say I want to find all of the schools in Kalgoorlie. Well, I could turn on my filtering by selecting the top row there and turn on my filtering with the little filter button. And then I get a filter on everything. Now, Kalgoorlie is listed as a suburb, so I can come in here to my suburb and you can see I've got everything there. Let's just clear everything out and go down here and find Kalgoorlie, which is somewhere down here. H-I-J-K, Kalgoorlie, there we go. So I'll turn that on, and we've got Kalgoorlie Post Office as well. So we'll include both of those. We'll do that, and you can see I've filtered down to all the Kalgoorlies. What if I only want schools in Kalgoorlie that are that go up to year 12, right? So I can come up to the high school year now, and I say only show me where year 12 is a match, and boom, so it gives me the filter there. Now what if I want to see only schools that are in Kalgoorlie that go to year 12 that have more than 500 students? So what I could do is go into this filter, and because I don't want to have to sort of tick all of these boxes necessarily, I can filter by a condition here and say show me where it is greater than or equal to 500, and when I say OK, it's going to filter down and show me the one school that matches that criteria. It's in Kalgoorlie, it's a high school, a year 12 school, and there are over 500 students. So that's an example of how you can take quite a large set of data and filter down really quickly by using those filters. Now, let me just unfilter everything here. Right, so I've just turned the filters off. I've got all of my data back again. It never went anywhere, by the way. It was just being hidden from me. The trouble with filters is when you're using a filter, very often, especially because sheets can be shared with other people. So if you're working on a sheet, filtering it and changing it and looking at it in different ways, and someone else who is shared with that sheet is also looking at it at the same time, then you'll have a bit of a problem, because as you go and make changes, it'll be changing for them. And vice versa, if they're making changes, it'll be changing for you. Very frustrating when you're trying to look at something and it keeps changing because someone else is working on it. So what you can do with that is this thing here called a filter view. And filter views work pretty much the same as a filter. The only difference is, well, there's two things. One is when you're playing in a filter view, you are the only one that's seeing the changes. It's not affecting anyone else who might be shared on this spreadsheet. That's important. And the second thing is if you create a filter view, you have the option to keep that filter view as kind of a saved filter. Let me show you what I mean. So I turn on filter views and say create a new filter view. And you'll see I get like a black outline around everything now. When you see those black bars, you know that's telling you you're working in a filter view. It's making it very obvious that you're working in this filter view mode. Now, the filter works the same, pardon me, the same way it does as a regular filter. So I can make a change here. So let's find all the schools. Let's go down here. Let's clear all that out. Let's look at North Metro and say South Metro. So we'll filter down on that. So you can see I've filtered there. And let's look at where all the schools filter by condition. Let's do that same condition where they are greater than, actually let's do greater than or equal to, say 500, and we'll go boom like that, and there you go. So I'm only seeing schools. Actually, there's still a lot of schools there. Let's change that to 1,000, 1,500. Let's change that to 1,500. Okay, and we'll say okay, and there you go. Right, so we're looking at all the schools in the North and South Metro area with a population of more than 1,500, greater than or equal to 1,500. All right, so that's useful. Now, because that's a filter view, anyone else who's looking at the spreadsheet at the same time is not seeing those changes. That's a really useful thing. Now, this might be a view you want to come back to occasionally. So you can come up here and name this. So I'll just call this Metro Schools over 1,500, right? So I'll give that filter view a name. And then when I come out of that filter view by cancelling it with the X in the corner, I come out of filter view mode. The list goes back to normal. I can now, like, everything is there again now, right? Everything I've filtered out. But you notice if I go back to this filter view list here, that filter is saved. So that Metro Schools over 1,500 filter that I created before, if I enable that, it goes back into filter view mode and shows me that specific filter. So if you've got class lists or anything else where you're looking at data in certain ways. You may be just filtering down to year 10 or all the students who have chosen a particular sport or whatever it might be. You can save those filters using a filter view and then jump back to them quickly at any time. If the data has changed since you made that filter view, then when you refilter it, it will show you the new match for that data. All right? So the filter view can just stay and the data can change, and it will always pull up the appropriate data based on the filter. Right, so I hope that makes sense. That they are super useful, these filter views, and you can create as many as you like, and you'll find them listed right here, just like that. So again, if I turn that off, it goes back, and I get all my data back again. So let's just, now that was an extreme example, showing you like 1,100 things in that list. Let's go to a slightly smaller list and just apply the same thing again so you can see exactly how this is working. So I've got a very much more simplified list here of the name of a student, the sport choice that they've made, and the year group that they're in. So let's do the usual thing. Let's lock off that front row. We don't want that getting mixed up with things. And so let's create a filter view by clicking on the filter view and saying create a new filter view, and let's look at all the students in year 7 who are doing basketball. So I go to my sport choice here, and let's do this one, and oops, sorry, what am I doing here? Filter views, create a new filter view, that's what I want, yeah. Oh, I've got to lock off that top row. That's what have I done? Ah, there you go. I don't know why they didn't appear from me before. There you go. So I've got these little triangles here, which is what I was after. So I want basketball. So I click on sport choice, and I turn off everything else. I could have cleared everything and just selected basketball, or I can just unselect the ones I don't want and say OK. And now I get the basketball list. And I only want the year 7s, so I go to my year group up here and I turn off everything I don't need, or I clear it and select the one I do need and say OK. And you can see now there's the list of year 7 students who have chosen basketball. If I want to keep that filter, I can go in here and call it year 7 basketball. And I do that, and I now have that filter. If I wanted to just get rid of that, right, I get my whole list back. If I need to get that list back, there it is, year 7 basketball, and boom, it just filters it down for me. So that's, again, a simple example of how that works. Now, let me just unfilter everything again, because I want to just finally just leave you with this idea of something called a pivot table. This looks complicated, so when you see this in the next minute or so, please don't turn off and go, oh, I could never do that, right? It's really easy once you understand it, but I will admit that it looks confusing to start with. So stick with me. I got this list with name, sport choice, and year group. Within sport choice, I think it's basketball, soccer, tennis, and swimming, right? I have 4 sports, and I have 4 year groups. So what I want to do here is I want to select only the columns that are relevant, right, and everything else is blank, so I don't want it. So I'm not going to select it. Just select the 3 columns. And then I choose this option up here from the Insert menu called Insert a Pivot Table. Now before I do this, let me just quickly tell you what a pivot table is designed to do. I've got this list of data here that you can see, and it's in a certain format. It's a list of names. But if I want to pull individual things out, it's kind of complicated. I could come up here and I could sort that. So now I have all the basketball kids, all the soccer kids, and all the swimming kids and so on. That's one way I could kind of look at this data. I could also, let's just undo that. I could come up to this year group here and I could say filter by year group, and I see all the year 7s and all the year 8s and so on. I could filter that way. So, I could sort that way, and it gives me another view of the data. There's lots of ways I could kind of look at this data. I could look at it by sport. I could look at it by year group. I could look at it by alphabetical name. It's the same data. That's the important point. I'm just looking at it differently. That's what a pivot table does. It takes a group of data like this and allows you to kind of pivot or look at it in different ways, right? That's the idea of a pivot table. So again, let's come back to our, I'll just undo that because back to being random again. So let's select those 3 rows, sorry, 3 columns, and we'll say insert a pivot table, and this box pops up. It says, okay, where do you want your pivot table? I can either have it in a new sheet or an existing sheet. I would normally put it in a brand new sheet. In fact, let's do that. Let's put it in a new sheet. So we'll say create, and you can see what happens. It created a new table down here, or a new tab here called pivot table, and I've made 4 of these before, which is why this one's called 5, right? It's also over here on this side, it's put name, choice, sports group. Name, choice, sport, no, start again. Name, sport, choice, year group, right? Which are the 3 column headers that we had. The structure of a pivot table is that it's a set of rows and a set of columns, and in the middle is what they call values. And you can pivot this, you can change the way this looks to look at this data from different angles. So for example, if I take this word name and I drag it down here and I drop it into the rows area, you can see I get a list of names. So I've put the names in the rows, right? They're going down the page. Let's just get rid of that for a second. Let's say I put sport choices in the rows. I drag that down there. You can see now I get my sport choices down there. What about if I took my sport choices and I moved it to the columns? So I'm simply dragging it down there and dropping it in the column section. Now they go across the page. So what's happening here is I'm changing the table that's showing there. Sorry about the microphone. I'm changing the table that's showing there depending on where I drag the 3 possible things that could be in this table: name, sport choice, or year group, right? Now, let's just say I need to see which kids are choosing what sport. So I could come and drag sports into the rows, and it puts that there. And then if I grab the names of the students and I drag that also into the rows section, I get that. So it tells me here's the basketball kids, here's their names, here's the soccer kids, here's their names, and so on. I've pivoted or twisted that data around to display in a different way to the way it was originally displayed. So that's one way you could do it. What about if I take year group and drag year group in here as well? Let's put it in the middle. So now it says sport choice year group name, and there you go. So I get my sport choice, my year group, and the name. So here are all the basketball year 7 kids. Here are all the basketball year 8 kids, basketball year 9 kids, and so on. So again, I'm just pivoting the data to look at it differently. This looks complicated, I know, but once you get the hang of what's going on here, it's so powerful in terms of helping you manipulate data and look at data in different ways. Let's try this. Let's take year group and move it down into the columns area by dragging it down like that. And you can see now it moves those across there. Now, I'm not going to put the names of the students there. So what I've got here is the sports in rows. I've got the year group in columns. And you see it adds a grand total on either side. If I don't want that, I can actually turn those off, just like that, and they go away, right? But let's turn them back on again, okay? And what about if I take the names of students and drag them down into the values area down here and let that go? Well, instead of listing students' names, what it will do is it will simply count. And you can see it's saying here, it's going to summarize by the count of the students, right? So what now is it's telling me that there are, in year 7, there are 6 students doing basketball, 3 from year 8 doing basketball, 8 from year 9 doing basketball, and so on. It's taking that data and making it in a format that might be more useful for what I want to see. And it's all coming from that original table of data there that we haven't changed. That's still there. We're just using the pivot table to view it in different ways. So, just by moving the options of what you're looking at into either rows or columns or values, you can manipulate this data. And you can fiddle around with this in different ways. You really can't mess this up. You can't. The worst that you could do is try and ask for something that doesn't make any sense, but would still work. So if I take name, for example, and drag name up into columns, right, I get this sort of like it's doing what I'm asking. It's just not what I want, so I wouldn't do that. So maybe you move that down. And honestly, when I learned to do this, it was a little bit of trial and error. Just taking things from this column here and dragging them into either rows or columns or values until they made sense and they told you the data story that you were trying to understand. So I hope that makes sense. Ignore this bit about filters down the bottom here. That's if you want to get rid of something. So we'll show you. Let's just say I wanted to exclude a specific year group. I could filter that there and say, don't show me, for example, year 9 and 10. So I can do that, and that would only show me the year 7s and 8s. So that's what the filters is for, if you want to get rid of anything and not show it in the data. I'll just get rid of that and bring it all back. So this is a live table that changes depending on what you're putting in here. All right, so I hope that makes sense because it is super, super powerful. And the last thing about pivot tables, and this is, I think, one of the coolest things you can do with the pivot tables, I can see in here, for example, that in year 10, there are 23 students in year 10. And I could go across here and say there are 22 students doing soccer. But who are those kids? Well, if I click on the 22, what it does is it generates a new table for me called Detail 3 Soccer, and it lists there are the kids who are doing soccer. Let's go back to the pivot table and I say, well, who are the 5 kids that are doing swimming in year 8? Double click on that 5 and it's generated a table for me, and those are the 5 kids doing swimming in year 8. So once you've got the pivot table, just double clicking on any number in the pivot table will expand that out into its own sheet that has its own detail on that specific combination of data. All right? There is a lot of stuff in there, guys, but those concepts that I've just shared with you on filtering, on taking a set of data and using the filters to either sort it out in a certain order or filter it out by including or excluding certain criteria. And then the pivot table, which is really kind of like a super tool for doing both filtering and sorting all in one. It's a really powerful tool. And I hope you get it. I hope if you don't get it, go back and watch this video a second time and have a play with it as you go, because it is probably one of the most useful tools that spreadsheets offer. And with that, I'll leave you be. Thanks for joining. I hope you found our sessions for support staff in schools useful, and good luck with using all this newfound knowledge.